Alright, so here we have four images. So these are actual image art text. So we have one, two, three, four images. The images were added here in the HTML section here. But you notice that even though the code is typed one above the other, the images line up side by side. And the reason for this is that images, their default flow on a web page is to be inline, so they'll go beside each other. Now, you'll compare that to H1 tags as an example. They're just one example of what we'll call block elements that when you put them in, so we'll just do that here as a demonstration. Oh, sorry about that. Let's get that back in there. Let's add another one. Right, so you notice that these go one below the other, right? Because they're by default they're block type elements. It's just the way how they flow, and that's why when you want to change the flow of the images, let's go to the CSS section here. You change the display to block if you want them to go one above the other. Right, so that's why display block does that. Something that would happen with the H1 by default and other tags like the paragraph tag, etc. That has to be done by you specifying the display setting as being block. Okay, so once again, if I remove that, you see it goes side by side. So unlike the H1, which naturally has a setting of a display being block, then there you go. So you see that being side by side. Okay, so just as how we have the H1 tags, or any header tags for that matter, being displayed as a block by default, that would mean, if you can guess it, what would happen if I type display inline? Can you guess what will happen? Give you a few seconds before I do it. There you go. So that's what you have as a default display for images. They're inline elements, and that's why they're side by side. But because the H1 tags are blocked by default, so whereas we had to type block here to get the images to be displayed one below the other, we do the inline because they're already blocked for the, oh, now I'll have to scroll down to see them. So by default, header elements, paragraph, div, etc. All of those are block type elements, so they always create a new space when you put them in. So if I put display inline for the H1, then you see that it lines up side by side. So this is just to give you a bit more clarity in how you use certain CSS to get a desired result in terms of the direction that the elements appear in the flow of the page, so that it makes sense to you when you're typing some of the code. Why do I type the word block there? And of course, part of the reason why you use the word block there was because you had to use this approach to try and center all the images there. Alright, so just to remind you, so we use the technique of using auto margins and a block applied to the image. So this selector here would apply to all images. There's no class here, so it would affect every single image. We use that technique to center the image, but if it stays as it is here in an inline side by side each other, then of course we wouldn't have them centered properly. We'd need them to be in the block format. But just to illustrate, let me go ahead and set the margins here to auto, and let's see if we have any result. Okay, so no result because of course we're having the images inline, so the centering is not going to really work like that. When we apply the block display, however, though, then we see the images are centered. Okay, so of course we needed to have the margins being adjusted. Otherwise, it would just simply look as if we only had the display block applied previously before we had the margin code in. But as I just mentioned, the reason why we get it centered is because we have it in the block format. Because if it's not in block format display, it'll be side by side, and then the centering won't be applied, it won't be visible to us. Okay, so hopefully this helps you to understand a little better how the flow of elements on a web page works. Okay, of course, as with everything, practice will help you to refine your understanding about this. You have seen here that we can change the display flow of a header element, right? So if we change the inline and we get it side by side. So this will be useful when we want to do things like create a menu, for example, or just for any reason we want to have something side by side. So, we could have something like home there. Could have something here like contact us. Right? And for whatever reason, we may want it to be side by side. Okay? So again, by default, header elements, as one of many other type of block elements, are default block. So if I remove the inline, which forced it to be that way, then this is how it normally would be seen in our document, in our web document, when we have typed in an H1 element as well. I could also add a paragraph element here just to show that there are other type of block elements. You can find a list of them if you need to. This is a demo paragraph. Let me close this. Also a demo here. Alright, so as you notice, by default, it's pushed down on a new line, and that's why a paragraph tag is also a block element. So, as you guessed it, if I wanted them to appear side by side, then I could just add a CSS rule to that. So the selector is a P selector for the paragraph, as we know. And then we would type what? You guessed it, display, and what would be the setup for that? What would we type? Yeah, so we would type inline because it's already blocked by default. And see, there it goes. So now the words jump up, the paragraphs jump up to be side by side. Alright, so feel free to replay this video. The code for the CODEPEN that will allow you to access this without having to type all these image links and so will be in the description as well.